A few friendly reminders: how to register. 3 simple steps, not in any particular order, but you have to pay the registration fee and then sign the competitor agreement and then complete the technical submission. Again, you don't have to do these in any particular order. You can start the technical submission first if you'd like. You can pay the fee first if you'd like. You do have to pay the fee before receiving the competitor agreement to sign. But again, you can do these in any order that you like. The resources at the bottom here, we've sent these out in email. We can also send these out again in the next email. But this is a document to kind of explain how to do these 3 steps, and then also a video demonstration too, if you're more of a visual person. So we'll send these out again for you. So accessing the technical submission is very easy. It's on POP, of course. This is where you'll do all your activities throughout the competition, but all you have to do is navigate to POP, click the activities tab, find the technical submission row, and then click start. And then you'll go from there. You'll see the technical submission right there in POP, and you can fill it in. There is an option to save your progress along the way. We do recommend this. All you have to do that is click Save Progress. And then if you haven't created a new form site account, you'll see this dialog box to create a new account for that. Just a reminder, this is a different account from POP. So you'll have 2. You have one for POP and then one for form site. And that's what you're seeing on this slide. So in order to save your progress, create a form site account, and then if you want to come back and work on your technical submission later, all you have to do is click the login button, and then you'll see your user login for form site, type it in, and then you'll see your old progress. Additional resources are available for you on POP. So click the resources tab and you'll see everything you see on my screen now, including the guidelines, the rules and regulations, a read-only version of the technical submission, the competitor agreement, that's another read-only version, and then Exhibit G, that's kind of a component of the competitor agreement that your team members will have to sign, and then the style guide, which is used for marketing and branding and so forth. So now I'm going to pass it off to my colleague MJ, and she's going to give us a high-level overview of the technical submission right now. So MJ, can I pass it to you, please?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. So high-level overview again, just of the technical submission form. It falls into 3 core parts. The first one being team demographics and general information. This is really just information that we're gathering internally. It's not something that you will be judged upon or a part of your score by the judges who will be reviewing your technical submissions. The second part is really where the heavy lifting is. Please don't underestimate it. You're going to be putting in your proposed solution, details pertaining to that, and all of your technical information. I'll be passing this along to Kate to share a little bit of background on, more depth upon in the environmental and economic consideration. Oops. And that'll be part 2B, excuse me. Thank you, Jordan. And the next slide is the third part is additional materials and attachments. In part 2, there will be some answers that will require a lot of outside information to answer. And we would like you to know that you have this option to upload your calculations and other things a part of the review process that you'd like judges to see in the part 3 additional materials attachments. I think that's about it. So we'll go back to part 2B for Kate to discuss the environmental and economic considerations.
Sure, great. Thank you so much, MJ. So I'm going to really briefly share screens here for the rules and regs. So hopefully everyone can see that. So I'm going to just really quickly walk us through what we're kind of looking for in terms of some of the more complex parts of this technical submission. So MJ did a really good job of outlining where you all will probably spend the most time. I'm going to just go step by step through this. We've had a number of questions about people and their products and how there might be slight variations between one product and another, and how a team might be able to manage some of these precise metrics. Those are all completely valid questions. The good thing about that is no team is going to have the exact same type of product as another. So therefore, we're going to do our best to see how we can compare these numbers in the most consistent way possible, but know that you're not alone if you're struggling to get things that look like they totally fit in the box. We're looking for out of the box solutions. So as kind of one would expect, we're not going to get really pat answers. That said, I'm going to give you a quick walkthrough of what we are looking for teams to submit, and then I'm going to afterwards take a moment to talk about how you can find ways to demonstrate what you're doing, how that fits, and how you calculated your numbers. So in general, we're looking for 3 metrics in this competition: a water score, a land score, and an energy score, particularly on the cell-based side. I'll start there and then go into the plant-based side. MJ, please do add some additional considerations with plant-based as they arise. Doing my best to cover those, but I'm a little surface on the plant-based. So for water score, basically what we're looking to do is to figure out what water is used to produce this 100 grams total protein, normalized by the grams of wet cell paste or cell-based component per 100 grams of total protein. So we encourage you to demonstrate your calculation and show where your numbers came from. That should ideally be one of the more straightforward to calculate metrics of these for most teams. For land footprint, that's the grams of carbon for each protein in a serving for 100 grams total protein. So we've had some really great clarifying questions around this one. So to emphasize kind of what goes into that number, this is the carbon that goes into the product. So it's not the carbon that you might find in a calculation of CO2 emissions or anything like that. It's literally the grams of carbon that goes into the product. So we can talk a little bit more about that later if that comes up. There are lots of different ways you can calculate that. For some teams, that's going to look very different than it will for other teams. So energy, we're looking for some metrics that involve grams of wet cell paste divided by liters of media over days cultured, times again this normalization factor. So essentially what we're looking for here is for you to do the best you can to calculate how much energy goes into growing your cells. So for that, if you can submit these numbers, great. If you do have any variety of considerations around these numbers, please describe those and the judges will take that under consideration. So for plant-based, we're looking for the mass fraction of each ingredient, water used in liters per kilogram for the finished ingredients. Land is going to be hectares per kilogram of the finished chief ingredients. And so we're going to be looking for a lot of these more precise numbers here. And ideally, if you need references for a lot of these numbers, you can find them in this great GFI Crop Opportunities report, which should give you more details on how exactly you can find those number calculations. Also, it's important to note if you do have anything that's a little bit different from the way these things would normally come across to people, additional information, novel ingredients, etc. Please do note those. Those are an important part of the competition. MJ, do you have any kind of final points or?
I guess I would just, it's stated there in the rules and regs, but just to highlight it, what we mean by chief ingredient is when we're looking at the overall matrix, whatever composes the majority of the protein content, those are the portions we're most interested in, especially on the plant-based side. So in this case, it would be like if you're using a blend of pulses and legumes to reach your protein content, those are the specific ingredients to highlight when doing your environmental considerations. Also, it's very understandable that you won't be able to find the information on the upstream manufacturing of your finished ingredients that you're using. So we have linked GFI's APAC Crop Opportunities report to give you some guidance around that. We understand that it may be very general numbers that don't represent the finished ingredient, but rather represent the raw material. So instead of it being pea protein, you might just find information pertaining to yellow field peas. And I think that's it.
Thanks a ton, MJ. Yeah, so I do want to note just one additional kind of thing that I touched on a bit in the past, but we have added tons and tons of boxes into this application form for you to describe exactly how you're calculating everything. A little bit like some of those exams you maybe took in the past, the more information you can give us, the more information the judges have to be able to evaluate these applications. So please do describe how you got to these places. A lot of it is back of the envelope style calculations. So just let us know what went into that. We appreciate as much detail as you can give us. Any water numbers can be given in liters. That's the best for measuring. And that's really all I have to say about that. So I'm going to hand it back to you, Jordan.
Great. Thanks, Kate and MJ. I think we have one question already in the chat, kind of following up on MJ, what you just mentioned about the chief ingredients. Maybe we can start there, and everyone who's attending, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat if you want. Also feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question verbally if you like that best. But we'll go ahead and get started with this first question. So it's all product feedstock materials required for the one batch of one batch of finished chief ingredients. That's a quote from the rules and regs. Can you explain a bit more on what you mean by this?
Sure. I'm happy to go first. And Kate, for the cell-based space, please chime in. So product feedstock materials for plant proteins typically include water, as well as agents that are used to separate out the proteins from the other ingredients within the raw material matrix. And any of the other agents that are used to purify the ingredient. There can be a variety. It can definitely vary from crop to crop. So those would be some examples of product feedstock materials. However, if you find it for the raw material itself, it could also be that we're looking for just the amount of water or other nutritive agents that are needed to grow that raw material. It really depends on how much information you're able to find for the plant protein side and specifically to the plant proteins that you're using.
Yeah, that's great. And I have very little to add. For some cell-based teams, there may be things like cell growth media components. So you might want to say something like Dobeco's modified Eagles medium, if that's what you're working from. Some of these other really kind of standard top ingredients, maybe sucrose. But other than that, it's pretty much what you have the most of in your product.
Robin, do you feel that adequately answers your question? I welcome you to chime in.
Yes, thank you. Yep, basically, I feel that we had, do you understand me well? Do you hear me?
We can hear you.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah,
Basically, the biggest question was like by product feedstock materials, because a lot of, or the other question more like, okay, let's say we use pea protein, for example, then I would understand that like one batch, let's say 1 kilogram requires, for instance, 100 gram of pea protein or something like this. But you mean also maybe the waste material that like we cannot use, like if the efficiency is not 100%, or did I understand it wrong?
I see what you're saying. So and correct me if I'm mistaken here, Robin, but you're wondering if you should also be taking into account the other things that are essentially co-products or byproducts of plant protein isolate. So in the case of pea protein, when you're isolating it down to a more purified plant protein, pea protein product of, let's say, 80% protein content, you also have a lot of refuse in the form of starch, fiber, maybe a trace amount of fat. And you're wondering if you should include that in your environmental considerations.
More, for instance, let's say you have a process and not 100% of the ingredients that you put in, you can turn into a product, because there's always some kind of waste or something that gets lost in production. I was wondering if this question is aiming towards this, like, for instance, if there's like a loss in production of 5% or something like this.
I'm so sorry. I don't feel that I firmly understand, but it could also be because I'm losing a bit of what you're saying in the echo of like just the quality of your audio. Do you think that you might be able to type it into the chat window, and then we can circle back to your question?
Sure, I'll just write an email. And sorry for the echo. We moved to a new office.
It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So sorry
Thanks.
about that. We will circle back, Robin. Jordan, I'll let you go next with which question we should answer.
Sure. So it looks like the next one in the chat is, if we are working on a fermented protein, but it is not of animal origin, is it classified as cell-based or plant-based? And that's from
That is-
Siddhartha.
Yeah, that is a great question. So we talked about this long and hard, and where we landed on this is there's a checkbox in the application that says, does your product contain any cell-based component, or does your product not contain any cell-based component? So if you check the cell-based, that's one set of questions and one way to answer it. If you check the does not contain any cell-based component, that's another kind of set of questions to answer. So fermentation products are really exciting. That's important to note in your product that you're using fermentation technology, but it is also important to note whether or not you have cell-based constituents. So in one sense, the type of application you fill out will depend on cell-based, not fermentation-based. But that said, please note your novel technology and your method of production. That will be very important.
I just cleared my throat so loud. I'm so sorry, and it was not on mute. I'm so embarrassed.
I hardly heard it.
Okay, thank goodness.
Thank you for your answer, Kate. I think the next question is a follow-up on the chief ingredient question again. So this is from Surly. I guess that it is okay if we don't have a mass fraction for chief ingredients at the moment.
I'm happy to start with this answer. So mass fraction just being the fraction of the overall matrix that is your chief ingredient. It is understandable you don't have a finished formulation at this time. However, there are some like ranges that you can do to provide a somewhat informed answer for this portion right now. So for example, if the and we haven't released this, although it is the details included in the rules and regulations around nutritional equivalence. If you are aiming to meet X grams of protein, let's just say it's 10 to keep the numbers easy, 10 grams of protein, and you know that you want to use pea protein and it has 80% protein content, you can at least do your basis on 10 grams divided by 80%, which is 12.5 grams. And then an assumed serving size in grams that you will have, which will work off of the serving size that is standard for traditional animal products. This can be found through the USDA food database resource, but there are also other resources, and we've mentioned those in the rules and regulations. So hard numbers, you're correct. It's okay that you don't have those. Anticipated ranges are what we're looking for at this point in time. Kate, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think that's a beautiful
No?
answer.
Okay.
Thanks.
Great.
Great. Thank you, MJ.
Sure thing.
All right. Who has a question?
Hello, this is Vahid. Actually, I have a question, particularly for cell-based meat and then calculation of carbon emission. Since it's pretty complicated process, and you can use carbon in, from the heating element, from the variety of sources. It's not as straightforward to really calculate the base number. But recently scientists published a LCA and did a lots of effort that GFI also support. They do a good calculation of the this type of footprint for cell-based meats. Of course, can we use this number as a reference and compare our system, particularly how they fit to such a system?
No. So we have the guidelines established for how teams are supposed to submit their information for energy, water, and land. And so those are separate from a lot of these other types of calculations. And that is when possible to make the scoring as consistent between teams as we possibly can. When it comes to life cycle assessments for a lot of these considerations, you were cutting out a little bit, so I'll try to answer what I think your question was. And if you have further clarification, we can either follow up by email or possibly a subsequent question. But what I would say is life cycle assessment data is not something we're looking for at this point. And in general, I would shy away from it because it does not answer the questions that we're looking to get answers for. So for the carbon that goes into a product, For cell-based, primarily that would be grams of sucrose. It would also be grams of energy that goes, or grams of carbon that goes into growth factor production. Those would be the main constituents. If you want to use molar mass and do some back the envelope calculations from there, that works too. For energy calculation, we're trying to keep it as simple as possible and have it directly derived from your data. So that's where those metrics come from. That said, we do understand that maybe you need to think about what that looks like downscale, upscale, some of those considerations. But as much as you can derive those numbers from your actual data, the better.
Okay. Actually, we do have a production line at the lab scale currently, and then we can get some of those numbers from lab scale. But okay, I do see that we should not use that number as a kind of assumption. But still, we should use some kind of assumption at some point, because we really don't have a electricity that we are using right away, for heating up.
I'm really sorry, you're cutting out badly enough. I can't
Okay,
understand.
for instance, heating the bioreactor. Then
Bioreactors?
Yeah, bioreactor need heat, and then that heat also is a kind of source of,
Yeah, we thought about including
Amazing.
things like heat for bioreactors, but at this time we're really looking at a very few number of inputs that teams will consistently have. So we will not be looking at heat for going into bioreactors.
Okay, something that directly we put in a material as a source of ingredient, then is the best thing we can do.
Maybe at some point later in the competition, we're looking for more finely grained measurements around energy that may come into the equation, but not right now.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Vahid, and thank you, Kate. We had a follow-up question in the chat from Surly about the mass fraction. So I'm going to do my best to read this. If I don't get it spot on, Surly, please chime in and fill in the gaps. But if we use a different protein source and we don't have a final ratio yet, I think that's what was meant.
I think I understand, so I'll start answering, and Shirley, of course, please chime in afterwards. So what I'm gathering is that at this point in time, there are multiple protein sources you want to work with. You're not sure in what ratio you're going to apply them to the overall matrix, and that complicates your numbers. What you could do is just create a scenario that you are assuming certain ratios and that you're not going to be locked into that decision, and to make that like asterisk pretty clear when you do answer your question. There has to be something based on an assumption just so that we can get these values as opposed to just waiving it entirely. So I think one route to possibly go about this is that if you're aiming for X grams of protein per X gram serving size, that will compose a percentage of the overall matrix. And then within that percentage, you're talking about an assumed ratio, even though you're not going to necessarily stick to it because you still have to do your product development, due diligence, hands-on work of maybe keeping it even across, let's say 5 plant proteins, if it is plants that you're working with, at 20% each within that overall percentage. I hope that makes sense. I hope I didn't get you lost within the different percentages. I welcome you. Okay, she got her answer. They got their answer. All right, wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, MJ. Okay, Siddharth has another question. I'll read it out. The competition is to develop a chicken or a fish equivalent. Do we need to choose that right now, or can we make that decision further down the process? So I can answer that. You can change it at some point, but we would ask that you make your decision by the semifinalist verification round. So if you are using the same fundamental underlying technology, that's okay. You can change it later before the semifinalist technical verification. Great. All right. Who has a question? Anyone?
I have a question on the protection of intellectual property and or trade secrets and
Great.
how that and who's looking at the information that we're putting in and how could that be shared in the future.
Great. That's a great question, Carson. That's Ose might want to take that one. I'm happy. Oh, Ose, I think you're on mute.
Sure. Can you clarify what you mean, though? Are you asking who will have access to your submission and the use of your submission during the process of the competition?
Right. I wonder, I mean, obviously, I'm assuming that from an agreement standpoint, anything that we put in is pretty much locked into, who's reading it, right? I mean, because I would assume that there are other people. I mean, I don't know everybody who's reading our submissions and what we're putting in there that could potentially,
Sure. I think I get what you're saying. So let me just kind of give you my understanding. One part, you want to know who would have access to your submission during the competition and how are your confidential information protected during the competition. So for the first part, I believe the parties that will have access to your submission will be the XPRIZE team that will receive and pass it on to the judging panel, the partners where we may do the testing, and are there any other parties apart from this? That's it, right?
That's it.
Our judging panel has a strong confidentiality agreement with XPRIZE. Our partners would also sign confidentiality agreements with XPRIZE for the testing. You own your IP 100%, and XPRIZE would not have any rights to your intellectual property as covered in the competitive agreement. Does that help?
yes. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to say out loud.
Great.
Thank you.
Great question, Carson. Thank you, Ose.
You're welcome.
All right. We have another question from Siddharth in the chat. I can read it out. Our focus is on protein via fermentation. We will need to use other ingredients to make the chicken and fish. Should our focus of the technical submission be only on the protein, or should we include the other ingredients?
I'm happy to go first. I'm actually trying to look up what we put for the definition for chief ingredient, but there is a case where sometimes the thing that is responsible for your texture within the matrix won't carry a significant protein content, but it is like the keystone to making your product as good as it is. If that is how you feel about the other ingredient, I think that it should be included within the matrix, or excuse me, within your calculations of the technical submission.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's important to have your submission best represent the best product you want to submit for the competition. So that also will help with your innovation scores and a lot of these other kind of components that go into this process.
Okay. Thank you both. All right. Question about the nutritional composition from Surly. 90% of nutritional value. Does this apply to macronutrients or also fatty acid and amino acid composition?
This has yet to be determined by us internally. It is a great question. It's one that we are thinking about, because to have true nutritional equivalence, at least with protein quality, I mean, much of the conversation for the plant-based world is on having a complete amino acid profile. The best that I can do right now is to tell you to find the resource that you feel most comfortable using that is also the most reputable for guidance around nutritional equivalence to the traditional animal counterpart, and to match it on a macronutrient level. But to keep in mind that we will be releasing more specific guidelines behind the micronutrient content, which could also include not just the amino acids and fatty acid profile, but also things like vitamins and minerals.
Thanks, MJ.
Yep.
Okay, question from a top in the chat. Can we submit both a plant-based fish and chicken product that are based in similar technology and processes but varying protein sources? We should proceed with two. Would we proceed with two separate submissions? Did either of you want to take that, Kit or MJ?
I'm so sorry, Jordan. I'm happy to get started. If my memory serves me correctly, we're not welcoming within a single application to apply for two different products. If it is a separate product within itself, even if it borrows from the same technology, we would like them to have a second submission. Is that correct, Jordan?
Yes. Oh, okay. Yes, that's correct. Thank you, MJ.
Yeah, sure thing. I think, was that what was being asked?
Yeah, thanks so much, MJ. Which goes to the second question, would it be okay if they're very similar? If both submissions are similar?
I see.
As far as technology and yeah.
I guess I don't feel that I can answer this.
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point it's up to your discretion whether or not you think this is one entry or two entries. It sounds like you're talking about things that, you know, it's actually hard for me to know how similar or different they are. If you think they're very similar, maybe that's one. If they're not as similar, maybe two. I'd say it's completely up to your personal discretion. I would hesitate from submitting one document where you talk about two different formulations. I think that is something that would not be the best fit. So I'd say either tend to focus on one formulation or submit two applications. Jordan, do you want to clarify that or on the rules side?
I think that's right, Kate. Yeah, if they're, use your discretion, as you said, if they're significantly different, I would submit two different submissions. If you submit two, it might get a little bit confusing for the judging panel on kind of what you're applying with. So we can also set up kind of a separate call to dive into this deeper with you, Matab, if you'd like to kind of take a closer look at what you're proposing, and we can maybe better advise you there, if that helps.
Yeah, that does. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I have another question. In one of the part of submission for cell-based product, you asked for a cost of the current figure and then 5 years projection. Actually, current figure can be done easily, but the 5 years projection is need lots of assumption really to figure that out, and how you would proceed this.
Yeah, so for the 5 years,
we handle this.
What was that?
And how we can really handle this, because it's a lot of assumption. We assume that it's going to produce that much and then price reduce that much, and then I really have difficulty to give that number to you.
Yeah, I think it's wise of you to feel that that is a hard thing to provide. So essentially with that, we're looking for two things. One is, how innovative is your product? Let's blue sky it. Where would you go in 5 years? What would that look like, practically speaking? So dream big. You know, where would you like to be in 5 years if this all works? So that's one of the things the judges will be looking at, is that level of interest, you know, of your product. How interesting is it? The other is a little bit more nuts and bolts. How is what you're doing today going to apply to that product development for 5 years? Of course, you can't get that far, but I'm sure you are doing things right now that you're doing strategically for those future products.
Absolutely. Yeah, we are doing something, but giving the numbers that is quantitative. I can say we hoping that reduce by, I don't know, 90%, but you are asking about the numbers, and then
yeah,
so it should not be really. It's pretty lots of assumption.
Yeah, well, do the best you can.
Okay.
The numbers, yeah, the numbers today you can submit. Do the best you can. Explain how you got to them, and for future dates, whatever assumptions you're using.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you, guys. We have a question maybe for Ose here about IP. Regarding IP, is there any expectation from XPRIZE when it comes to sharing intellectual property within teams? For example, if you join forces with more than one organization in the same team.
Can you clarify when you say if you join, like, are you talking about two teams joining or something internal to your team? Like you're getting on partners that will provide intellectual property that will go into the submission?
Hi, Jose. Yeah, more the latter. So I know that we can make up teams which are consisting partly of one organization, maybe a startup or a company that already exists, and then draw in other people from other organizations. And I just wondered if there's any expectation from XPRIZE as to how we would share IP if we were collaborating with a research partner or something like that. I guess we wouldn't have to share any of the IP from our solution with them if we didn't want to, but I just wanted to make sure that's the case.
Well, the intellectual property we refer to in the competition is intellectual property of two parts. One that you have pre-existing and the one that you develop during the competition. If it's pre-existing, you have to have the rights to use them, and you have to have the rights to have them in the submission. If it's the one that is created during your active participation in the competition, and it's in collaboration, you have to make sure you have carry-on rights from your partners or whoever you're working with. So I would expect that you would have internal governance agreements in place to take care of that. So for XPRIZE, you're the party that we know. So what we expect from you is that you have the rights to use to the IP that is embedded in your submission.
Of course, that makes perfect sense. Thanks.
You're welcome. And I don't know if you were in the other sessions. I said Jordan can share my email. If there's any legal issue that you have, feel free to send me an email directly, and I will try to clarify. And especially with reference to IP, we've gotten a lot of questions about IP from a lot of the teams. So we are expecting to send out a clarification document to all the teams, especially on IP and on issues that have come up in a lot of the FAQs that we have. So that would help in explaining and giving you assurance on the issues that have been prevalent, especially IP and confidentiality. And I hope that helps. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Ose.
You're welcome.
All right. Who would like to go next? Don't see any questions in the chat at the moment. If anyone would like to unmute themselves and ask a question, please go right ahead.
I guess Ose hi, David from Pulsar Foods. I think Ose just answered sort of these questions, or more clarification on IP is to come. So I'll put them out there anyway. He's already answered the one about the non-disclosure that the judges have signed, which is grateful. Thank you for that question. So I had 3, that's 1 down. The other 2 was, let's say down the road, this is really not for the semifinal round, this is for further on, but may apply to many of the teams, is to get the technology rolled out to the world. Often licensing or is one part that might help licensing the technology. Is that sort of, that's on the company team to figure out, or is there any support XPRIZE kind of helps with in any way? And that's sort of, there's one other part, there's licensing, and then I don't know, if you don't have patents on your technology, is there any type of patent support? Or is that also on the team to figure out?
Thank you, David. I'll say that's a good question. With XPRIZE, we try to support the teams as much as possible. Prior to COVID, we would have team summits and opportunities for you to meet with partners. And in those team summits, we would have people that can provide this kind of support or that can give you the directions or guidance, especially for startups that haven't gone through this route before. With COVID, everything's been virtual. I'm not sure how the team summits are being held now. Jordan can speak to that, or if there's going to be a physical team summit in the future as people get vaccinated and they're able to meet. But those have been opportunities where we would be able to set up and provide support and guidance. So I'll leave that to Jordan to answer how that's going to work. I think we can take this into consideration and speak to Caroline, the prize lead, and see if there's some sort of support that can be provided to teams, and if there are partners that we can onboard that can work with teams generally on the concerns that you've shared.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, just to add on to that, David, it's a great question. And as Ose just mentioned, we will definitely take that into consideration when planning this first semifinalist team summit. We're currently doing that now. I can't give you a specific date yet, but it's planned for sometime this summer. So it will be a virtual event, obviously because of COVID, but we will take this into the planning phase and maybe host a separate workshop for supporting you on like the licensing and patenting process.
Thank you.
Great. All right, is there another question that someone would like to ask?
I noticed there's actually one in the chat window, but I'm not sure if Adefolami would like to ask a question since he's off of mute. They are off of mute. Are you able to hear anything?
I'm not, okay. I guess not.
All right, so to answer Greg's question, has there been any clarification about how many units of 1.5 to 2 ounce portions will be required for the semifinal round? So far, to my knowledge, it is that there have not been any decisions on how many portions, only what the portion size is, which is what Greg has already made known, 1.5 to 2 ounces. So unfortunately, no, we don't have more information on that at this time.
We will follow up shortly, though, in the next few weeks and months on clarifying that point. Thank you, MJ. All right. Questions? Anyone has a question?
I had the one other IP question, I guess, since we have Ose also might help the teams. Because historically there are so many patents existing on meat analogs, the legal term. I'm concerned that either patent infringement or patent trolls, one or the other, may come out of the woodwork, and maybe down the road. I don't know if XPRIZE also, that might be a part of the discussion, but is this something just, it's a low risk but high severity type of occurrence that if it were to occur. So it's just sort of on my mind.
Unfortunately, David, I have a very good answer to that. The burden is on you. So make sure you have the right to use whatever you present to us. So that's not my headache. That's totally your headache right there.
Understood. Understood.
But what we'll try to do is I'll work with the team, especially for the team summit, try to see if we can get support, and get experts in the field that can, as partners, that can, guide you and, kind of give you rules of the road that's going to help. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
I don't know if, can you hear me?
Yes, you can, Caroline.
Great. Yeah, I do want to reassure you, David and everyone else, part of the core programming for the competition is to host information sessions for the semifinalist and finalist teams on regulatory, regulatory support. We do investor summits where you can meet face-to-face with investors to pitch your product to them, as well as licensing support. So that is a core part of any XPRIZE programming, is to support teams along the way to get them to a commercialization stage if they wish to commercialize their products.
And hopefully, David, at that point, we will be past the COVID situation, and you will be in person. So that will be much more fulfilling for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, everyone. Siddharth had a question in the chat about where will the semifinalist round testing be conducted? Has this location been chosen yet? So unfortunately, not yet, Siddharth. We are in the process of making that selection, but we will be sure to update the teams as soon as we do have a location in mind.
Yeah. And just to clarify on this question and the one around the size of the number of product necessary for testing in the semifinals, these are the details that we will update and release new guidelines and rules and regulations before every testing round. So if you remember, when we launched the competition, we published general guidelines that live on the PRIZE website and the PRIZE operations platform ahead of the technical submission phase, which we're in, rules and 1.0. To submit. Oh, am I breaking up?
I think for me, we're a little bit, Caroline. I think to kind of fill in the gaps that anyone might have missed, Caroline was basically saying that we will be releasing an updated version of the guidelines and the rules and regulations in the future. Includes the details on these questions about like the semifinalist criteria and where the testing location will be and so forth. All these great questions that you're asking about those parts of the competition will be detailed in updated versions of those documents.
Right. Before every testing round, we will issue a new set of rules and regulations that govern that round. So we release in increments based on the testing. The other thing to note, we want to make this as easy for the semifinalist and finalist teams as possible. So one of the reasons we wait to release these rules and regulations is to know who the semifinalist teams are, where they are, so we can plan around testing regionally so that they don't, have to travel a long way to go to a testing site. So all these factors are taken into consideration when we determine a test site location or some rules about the criteria.
I think Deb had a Jordan, can you read the question from Deb about the formation of a company?
Yes, sure thing. And thanks, Caroline. So question from Deb in the chat, do we need to form a company in order to get grants from the XPRIZE if we were to move on to the next round?
That is a fundamental part of an XPRIZE competition. It's covered in the competitor agreement if you've seen it. So to be eligible to participate in the competition, you can participate as an individual, just one person. But if you're going to have more than one person on your team, 2 people, 3 people, you must form a company. It could be any form of company in your jurisdiction, but you have to form a company to be able to participate. You can only participate without a company when you have when it's just you. If you're also participating as a part of a university team, that is an exception, because then the university will be the entity that's sponsoring you, and the insurance information you provide will be that of the university. But other than those exceptions, you must have a company unless you're an individual, and individual is you're alone, nobody else is with you on the team. And while that seems onerous, we have put that out of experience. XPRIZE has been around for about 25 years, and we found out that while the teams get along during the competition, once money is involved and the disbursement of money is involved, it becomes a problem. And it is much better to issue a check to a company, and then internally you would have an agreement on how to disperse the winning funds. So I hope that helps, Deb.
Great, thanks, Osi. There is actually a kind of a follow-up to that question. Are they able to form their company after they know, let's say they were selected to move on to the next round? Can they form their company then?
No, actually, you must form a company once. So you can start out, if it's just you signing the competitor agreement, that's fine. You sign the competitor agreement and you start. But once you add another person to your team as a team member, the definition of a team member is in the competitor agreement, then you must form that company. But if when you started, you started it as just you going out to do this, that's fine. You don't have to have a company. But once you add an additional team member to your team, then you are supposed to form a company. XPRIZE does do compliance checks, but the team will notify you when they will do the compliance check. So we're not checking right now, have you done this, have you done that, are you a team member or not? We expect that you're doing the right thing, but then when Jordan and the operations team do the compliance check, they will give you a fair notice that a compliance check is coming. And the compliance check would also include checking whether you have the appropriate insurance per the competitor agreement. But you would have notice about that before it happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Ose. Okay, we have about a few more minutes here left. If there are any final questions, please go ahead and ask. You can send them in the chat. You can unmute yourself and ask it verbally if you'd like, whatever you prefer. Anybody? These were great questions, everyone. Thank you for joining. We'll be sure to send the recording out either today or tomorrow, and we'll send you the questions to your written out so you can find them in a written format too, just like the other two sessions.
Thank you.
Cool. I do have one other slide to share just as a kind of next steps thing. If you don't mind hanging on for just one moment. Okay. Can you guys see the slide? Okay, thanks, MJ. So just a few reminders. The registration deadline has been extended by 1 week. And so we're giving you 1 extra week to apply. The new registration deadline is June 7th. So that includes, to be fully registered, again, those 3 crucial steps in any order. Complete the technical submission, do that on POP, pay the registration fee, and sign the competitor agreement. Those are the 3 things you have to do to be fully registered for the competition, and you have to complete all 3 by June 7th. Like I just said, these slides and the recording will be sent out to you. This is our last session before the registration deadline of June 7th. We don't have any more planned as of yet. If that changes, we'll be sure to let you know right away. However, please feel free to schedule a one-on-one meeting with the XPRIZE operations team if you do have any questions moving forward before the registration deadline. We're happy to meet with you on a private Zoom with you and your team, and we can answer any of your questions in that format. So that link is here. It's the second to last bullet. Be sure to send this also in an email follow-up so you can have that. But please, we love to, some teams have already scheduled chats with us. It's been great. We liked meeting you and getting to have more FaceTime with you. So please feel free to utilize that resource. And then of course, if you have any other questions at all and you can't schedule a one-on-one Zoom, feel free to email us at feedthenextbillion@xprize.org. That's the main support email, and we'll be sure to respond to you there. So that's all. Thank you so much